We're never alone, even when there's not a physical body here. There are guides, there are angels, there are helpers, and there are people who have transitioned before us, who are always with us.
Thank you so much for tuning in to our video podcast of Second Act TV. And I'm so happy to welcome Paige Valdiserri back. Paige, we've gotten to know each other here, and you've actually came in from Tucson to be with us here at the Second Act Studios in Santa Ana, Orange County. So thank you so much, first of all, for joining us.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Any way I can help, I love this.
Well, those of our viewers and guests who have not seen you on our YouTube channel, you are, for lack of a better explanation, we'll go into this, a healer of many types. You are, let me get this title straight now, an international integrative international traumatic stress and integrative healing consultant.
Perfect. You got it,
See, I
Soka.
told you, that's a difficult title.
You got it, Soka. You got it.
Let's start by, we have the luxury in this wonderful podcast setting to really go more into depth, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to have Paige in studio. What is an international traumatic stress and integrative healing consultant?
That's a good question. I'll try and break it down. So I think everybody knows what international means. I do work internationally and here in the States. Traumatic stress. So I've lived in traumatic stress. I've worked for decades in the field of traumatic stress and regular stress as well. And what's interesting about stress and traumatic stress is it's always in the eye of the beholder. And a lot of people question me, well, what does that mean? So just very briefly, what it means is you and I could be out somewhere and see a horrible, terrible accident of some sort. And you are still shaken up, but you seem to rally around to be okay, where I decompensate. Because what no one realizes is, I don't know what's all in your history, or what I call in your suitcase, that you've had through this lifetime, and you don't know what's in mine. So we could both be in the same place, same time, watch the exact same thing, but both have very different reactions. So that's the big part of stress and traumatic stress. So it's not always the big, huge thing that happens, like a terrorist attack, although horrible. It's about how we personalize it and how we take it in. So that's the traumatic stress component. So for the integrative healing component, I integrate Eastern, Western philosophies, and I bring in the behavioral health world and the medical world together. So along with that, I have lots of different healing modalities, also to include my natural gifts that I was born with the clairvoyance, the medical intuitiveness, and being able to channel messages that are not from this world to help others.
Well, one of the things that we really that we like to do on Second Act especially, is to really, when we talk about recreating, redefining life, is to look at stuff that is not normally, accepted as normal, if you will. And that's why I'm so excited to have you here, that we can really delve into this, because you bring some very, very incredibly interesting, modalities or techniques to the table.
Yeah, and if I could just add, the consultant part of what I do as well is I help.
Hold on, sorry. Okay. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I'm getting this problem on your mic, but nothing's touching it.
Well, I have to tell you, this happens all the time. Phones don't work with me, mics have problems. It's by vibration. This happens all the time.
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
Maybe a bad cable? The cable...
There's a lot of guides in this room right now.
A lot of guys in this room?
Guides.
Oh, guides.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I hear it.
And she's not even... There's nothing touching.
Welcome to my world.
whatsoever.
Are we rolling right now?
Yeah.
This is interesting. This might be a really great part of the podcast.
It does. Each person's vibration level, vibrates to certain levels. Phones have a tough time working for me. When I'm around electronics, have a tough time working for me. This has happened before. So it's very interesting.
Okay, keep going.
Oh, okay.
So anyways, I was saying about the
Well,
consultant.
what's funny, let me kind of, I don't know if we're going to break or edit here, but you know, this is kind of where you said this is what happens to you with your, so let's go into more of an explanation as to what you do and what just happened.
What I do. So I take my experience of what I've had in this lifetime, as soon as I was born until this day. And then of course my certifications and what I've learned. And then from living through my own traumatic stress and then working with thousands of people in various populations, everything from military, special forces, to women's issues, men's issues, refugees, the medically and terminally ill, caregivers, you know, the list goes on. I started to see that certain things weren't happening of what clients and patients needed. And what I saw was a lot of times people go to practitioners and they want a practitioner to tell them what's wrong. They want a practitioner to fix what's going on with them. And although that's really important because we always need another set of eyes on people, what was missing is teaching my clients, my patients, what's going on with you, because you were born with your own guidebook. We all were. And the body tells the story. The body holds the story.
See, that's such an interesting concept because you know, we've been taught that you know, the mind, you control everything with your mind or get into your mind, but you're saying that that actually hinders learning what you've captured in your body.
Well, I think what I'm saying is that the mind is very powerful. It can really help people get over difficult, challenging times. But there's this other piece of this thing below our head called our body. And our senses, all of our senses take in every single thing we've experienced from being in the embryo to right in this moment. So you could be going along your daily life and there could be things that bother you here and there to different levels, different intensities, and the body is taking in everything that's happening. So maybe the liver has taken in that emotional component that just happened. And then the kidneys, they're holding a lot more. And then the intestines, they say, hey, you know what, let me take this hit. So if we always stay in the mind, we're not going to allow the body to tell the story. And then what happens? We get disease, dis-ease, medical illnesses, injuries. So I help people go into their actual body, into their autonomic nervous system, into their fluids, into their musculoskeletal system, into all of their organs. And everyone's pretty nervous about that because what I hear and see all the time is, what if I'm told something that I don't want to hear? What if there's something wrong with me? And I can tell you 100% of the time, and I've been doing this for a long time, that the body tells the story in a very loving, gentle way. And it's a part of being connected. You have to go within the body to find out what it's holding. And you know the adage, the elephant in the room?
Yes, of course.
There's an elephant in the room and we're going to walk all around it and not talk about it? Well, I call it the elephant in the body. We all have so many elephants in our body because society says, we don't want to hear that, or if you say that, that might label you this way or that way. Or if I speak my truth, who's going to get mad at me? Or if I speak my truth, who's going to come in and say, that's not your truth? Because your truth is what you experience. And like I said before, you and I can be at the exact same place in space, but my truth might be a little different than yours because of how I took it in. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's our experience here in this human body, you know, living this human existence, although we're all souls. It doesn't matter what color you are, what religion you are, what ethnicity you are, we are all connected to each other, to the land, all of us. So if something happens that's traumatic and terrible, when people want to turn it off, you know, what I say to them is, I understand it's too much. You want to turn it off. But you're connected to that person over in Turkey who was at that nightclub that got, you know, had another terrorist attack this New Year's Eve. So there's a connection to all of us. There has to be a way to begin going into the body, taking, I guess, self-empowerment, because whatever you learn, and I tell my clients and patients this all the time, whatever you learned through me, you've already known. I'm just assisting and guiding, but whatever you take, pass it on. It's a domino effect. In this world, in this planet, and we all need healing.
I mean, it's fascinating. I can't quite you know, and we'll get into this deeper, of course, and I know
Okay.
you teach workshops on this.
Yeah, I do
so-
lots of trainings, workshops,
Yeah.
speaking engagements with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Give us maybe one example of a modality or technique you would utilize with someone to help them get into their body.
So the first thing is, let's just face it, every one of us has been traumatized multiple times at some point. So we have some kind of traumatic stress and stress going on. So you have to first calm the fluids down in their body. So I use something called biodynamic craniosacral trauma therapy. And
Easy for you to say.
I know. So, and it's hard to explain, so I'm going to try my best. So Silke, if I had you laying down here on the couch, I can put my hands in certain placements on your body, and I could actually feel the fluids of your body.
Wow.
So when fluids move smoothly and then they come to a still point, there's homeostasis. It means it's calm. But rarely have I ever had my hands on anybody whose fluids are moving in the direction they're supposed to and is very calm. So most of the time the fluids are going like this, or they're going like this, or they're going like this. But what's amazing is just by putting my hands on certain placements of the body remembers, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to move this way. So the body will work out the traumatic stress in a very humble way, in a very loving way, in a very gentle way. And sometimes people might get reactions, you know, where they shake or they have body temperatures
Wow.
that changes, but it calms the body down. So you have to calm the body down first. And I also always teach a very important breath that calms down the autonomic nervous system. And I also teach very different ways of grounding, because most people are either in their head frantic or they're over here, and you can't go into someone's body and expect them to deal with things until they're really planted, grounded, calm, and quiet, because it makes it so much easier for them to remember what they've forgotten when they've come into this
Wow,
lifetime.
this is pretty heavy stuff.
Sorry.
No, this is great. I mean, basically, you assist people in healing and getting in touch with themselves in ways that a lot of us haven't heard about. And,
Yeah.
and I know that we are all very, very open-minded to this, and I'm just so happy that we're able to have this conversation and maybe, you know, get some information out there that is going to be very useful and very helpful. But I really want our viewers and our listeners to understand, when you talk about traumatic stress and understanding, you know, trauma and the effects it has on your body, really what you've gone through. Your history is incredible. What I really want to talk about now is my goodness, how did you get where you are? How did you learn, you know, this? Is this what you wanted to be? Did you say when you were 4 years old, I want to be an international integrative stress?
No, that would have been too much of a mouthful for me. No, what I believe and what I have a knowing about, and I'm sure that we'll get into this at some point, is, you know, we come into this lifetime for certain purposes and on certain soul levels. And soulfully, I knew that I was here to help people. But, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard of the wounded healer.
Yes, I think I have, actually.
Okay. So, you know, when you've been wounded yourself, it's much easier to talk and work with someone who's wounded as well. So, and my story is really no different than maybe some other people's stories. Because let's face it, we've all had difficult times, challenging times. So what I want to make very clear is that, you know, as far as making me special, oh, I've been through so much, I haven't been through anything else than other people have been through. Maybe it's just been different. But for me, everything that I've gone through in my lifetime, I've been blessed with, because it's giving me the power, more of the insight to take my intuitive gifts to better understand what you've walked through, what somebody else has walked through. So not only do I help heal individual and group, but I'm teaching practitioners the things that I do as well too, to help. So, you know, for me, growing up, you know, I was a stutterer. So I couldn't even finish.
That's hard to believe.
Well, you might hear it. People might hear it. I couldn't even finish a sentence. So the only time that I didn't stutter was when I was on stage acting or singing. So, you know, bullying's been around forever. I mean, so for me, I was teased constantly about not being able to finish a sentence. And, you know, nobody really knows why someone stutters, but for me, I believe it also comes with the environment that you're in. And, you know, my environment for me when I was little, you know, the emotional and physical climate of it was inconsistent, it was volatile, it was very controlling. Although there was a lot of love, I walked around in fear, most of my life growing up, not knowing what was gonna, come next. So for me, I felt isolated, I felt alone, walking on eggshells. So my body really had a lot of PTSD in it when I was growing up, before people even knew what PTSD was.
But it was.
Yeah.
Well, and, in preparing myself for this interview, of course, we talked
Yes.
leading up to it, and I asked, for send me some things that we can maybe talk about, share with our viewers and our listeners, and I was pretty taken aback by when you say that you didn't go through anything more than anybody else did, I would respectfully disagree. I know I know there's people out there that have had trauma.
Yes.
Certainly not. Anyway, I'm looking at my notes here, and I just want to ask you about a couple of things.
Sure.
When I read this back to you, what comes to mind? The little girl who lived behind me.
Yeah, I get teary-eyed thinking about it. Yeah, she was, gosh, I didn't realize I would do this.
It's okay.
I think that was I saw a little girl who lived behind me who, there was a fence that was around her. And, back then, she had been run over by, I think, if I remember this correctly, she had been run over by a lawnmower. So her arm, back then, there weren't the prosthetics that there are today. So she had a hook, like you see with Captain Hook. And I remember meeting her through the fence. So we were playing through the fence. And I remember, talking to her, asking, what's that? And never being afraid by it. But I just remember looking at her thinking she was not allowed to leave that yard. Like that was where she played, was, in that yard. So for me, she was never allowed to come out, and I never saw kids over there, as I peered through the fence. So we played through the fence. She had a lot of trauma just from having that happened. So, but, as a little girl, we were just two little girls playing. It didn't matter to me. We talked about it, and then we moved along and played.
You put it as a little girl candy striper at the hospital in the emergency room.
That was my choice. I wanted to be a candy striper when I was 13, I guess it was 13, 14, and I wanted to work in the hospital. For whatever reason, hospitals felt very comfortable for me. I was always pulled to death. I was always pulled to the very traumatic things. When I watched, various movies and shows, my parents didn't want me to watch what I wanted to watch because I felt comfortable with it. The books that I would read, my mother would say, can we please read something light? And it was comfortable for me. So when I told her that I wanted to be a candy striper, signed me up, we went over there, and I was there, with other young kids. And although I did work in the coffee shop at some point, I had said, when they asked us, where do you want to go? I said, can I go to the emergency room? And I can't remember, I think back then they weren't really keen on candy stripers being there yet. And they'd asked, is there anywhere else? And I said, well, can I go to the morgue? And they were like, no, okay, let's try the emergency room. So for me, even at that young age, it was peaceful being in the emergency room around the chaos, because as I saw the first responders come in, and I saw people come in with pain, fear, they were alone. I knew what it was like to be alone. So as 13, 14, I knew just to hold the space for them, to hold their hand. When their family came in, try and get information to their family. But just holding the space, being there as a little girl of 13, was enough for somebody so they weren't so afraid. I didn't want people to ever feel alone. And later on in some of our segments, I will explain more of, we're never alone even when there's not a physical body here. There are guides, there are angels, there are helpers, and there are people who have transitioned before us who are always with us.
Well, let me ask you about that right now then, since you brought it up. Your grandmother was
Clairvoyant.
Yeah, she
the
was
real
clairvoyant, and she
deal.
brought that out or helped you realize that perhaps?
I grew up with a grandmother who was my best friend, and she, in Scotland, she was 100% Scottish, so she had a thick Scottish brogue, so she used to call me Paige. But she had this gift, which she didn't think was a gift. She would read just regular cards and tea leaves, regular tea leaves in the village in Scotland to everybody. And she could tell your past, your present, and your future. And I think at one point she had read for the Queen. whoever the queen was in the castle, I'm not sure about that. But when she was living with us, she used to sit me in the kitchen table and say, okay, Paige, here's the teacup. And I'd go, oh my God, I don't know. And she'd say, what do you see? And I'd be like, I don't know, a foot, a tree, a this. And she would continually say to me, you have got special gifts. You have got these gifts. She was right. I do have these gifts. I just don't have her gift. My gift shows up very differently.
And it shows up in trauma and in lots of the experiences that...
Yeah, and you know, because of some of the things that happened to me when I was growing up, you know, there was, like I said, the emotional, physical climate was very scary. There was inappropriate sexual contact when I was a little girl. So that, and then being in my young 20s and 30s, and most women who've been in the corporate world know this very well.
Yes.
You know, sexual harassment and being afraid to speak up. And when you do speak up, you're the person who gets moved, not the person who's, you know, doing the sexual harassment.
Right.
So between, you know, the emotional, physical, the fear, feeling shame, the inappropriate sexual stuff, and lots of other things, you know, growing up.
Wow. And that took you to some areas of the world where you saw things that nobody should see. Again, reading in your notes, you were an advocate in Iraq for potential honor killings.
Well, I'm very big on girls' issues, women's issues, of course, because of everything that I've been through.
Yes.
But I deployed to Iraq, and that was my choice to deploy. I was putting together holistic behavioral health programs to support...
Working with the government.
We're working with a contracting firm, but we supported the government, the military, and the first responders, and I worked with the local Iraqi national linguists as well. And it was a Friday evening and in Iraq, and I got a call, Paige, we have an issue, we have a problem here, can you please come out? So I come into a room, and it must have been, I don't know, a couple different men, nobody knowing what to do, because there was an 18 and 19-year-old local Iraqi national girls who were linguists working with our military. So up in one of the military bases in Iraq, the Iraqi National Police came outside and stood with their father and said, we are here to get his daughters. And there was a treaty that the military couldn't get involved in domestic kind of affairs.
Right.
And so they didn't know what to do. So I said, I didn't even hesitate. I said, fly them to me, fly them to Baghdad. So they flew the girls to me, we hid them there. So while I was running the clinics and I was working on the behavioral health and still helping people, you know, with my sessions, I began this process with these two young girls. And one of the young girls had shown me the beatings from her back, and learned a lot about, you know, the honor killings. And if you go against any male in your family, well, they will kill you. So that started a very long history and story of asking them, do you want a better life? Well, let me try and give you a better life. So this went on for a year of, you know, moving them around Iraq, them finding a way to get smuggled over to Syria, us moving them from Syria to Jordan. And a lot of different things happened with that project that were very heartbreaking to me, because we had started to work with attorneys. By that time, they were, I think, 19 and 20 by that time. And we were going to adopt them and bring them into our family. We did a big fundraiser to help them have money so when they came here, we could put them to college. But the one thing that was always in me, that I saw always, and I told my husband this, was, look, they have a lot of trauma. And with trauma comes sometimes manipulation, because when you're in situations, you're going to do whatever you have to do to get out of that situation. So I always knew that when we got them here to the States, that they would have to get counseling and take the coping skills that they used to get here to change that around. So they got here, but it went from bad to worse for us. And basically got them here, got them set up, and then never heard from them again. But what I keep telling my husband is, the one thing when I went through all of this with them was I wanted to make sure that I gave them unconditional love the whole time.
Oh, I'm sorry, you make me cry.
I just wanted to make sure it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter if you're a refugee, what color you are, we're souls. So I always wanted to make sure no matter what they did, they were young, I just wanted to provide them the space, give them the love. So, that's what I did.
Okay. It's a great time for us to take a break.
Great.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Sure.
Okay. Well, Paige, okay, we both dried our eyes a little bit. We're laughing, but this isn't funny. We're making this a little light,
No,
we can.
it's all good. Things happen the way they're supposed to happen, whether it's, for karmic reasons, but every situation that I've ever been involved with, there's always a teachable moment, and there's always lessons, and there's always themes. You just have to begin to look at it that way.
Yeah. Well, one other thing we were going to get to right before we took our break was your experiences when I read those in Rwanda.
Yeah, I love Rwanda. I love Rwanda.
Okay, good, because I read that and I thought, oh my God, I would never want to be there. So I just admire you so much for even doing that. Tell us about Rwanda.
A special place. Well, I love Africa, first of all. So Rwanda, spent some time in some of the villages and some of the things that I was able to be a part of, and so blessed to be a part of and lucky to be a part of. Gone into one of these villages where these were where young girls and young women had been brutally raped, assaulted, lots of trauma. And some people probably know this already, but dance is extremely healing. So as I went into the village and sat with kids that were 4 years old to women all the way up, telling me their stories, what happened to them, every detail, and then teaching me what this African dance was all about. So, and let me tell you, when they danced, I was exhausted because the dance just went on and on and on, but I got to dance what their healing dance were specifically for sexual assault, for rapes, for heinous things that happened to them. And each movement that we did meant something with the story. So I got to dance with 3-year-olds all the way up to, young adults. And since I had that in my background as well too, was it
The
me really?
sexual abuse,
Yeah.
yeah.
Was it really me helping them, or were they helping me? And what I've always learned is we're helping each other always. Always. Not one person is really always the leader. You learn so much in the, tiny things. So worked with that, and then I'm sure that you know about the genocide that happened in Rwanda.
Yeah.
Went and spent time with another village where we, sat down and
Were
they
you
had
there when that happened?
No, I wasn't there when it happened. We came in to talk to the government about how they could help with PTSD with the survivors of genocide and in trauma in general. Because what Rwanda wanted to do was really start to do some, I can't say cutting edge.
So you were there like in response to...
We were there to try and help the government on here's what we all knew about trauma and what you could do to help your people.
Sure.
So one of the villages that I was in, we sat down, with the council, with the tribal council, and this was just amazing to me, is that in this village, it's called a reconciliation village, and one home is where the perpetrator lives. Next door is the family that the perpetrator slaughtered during the genocide, and then the home after that is just someone who really didn't have anything to do with both of them. So as I sat there and listened, the perpetrator would first go up, and you could tell at that time there was such a forgiveness and a sorrow and a shame for what they had done. And they would stand up in tribal council and they would talk about what they did, why they did it. There was lots of tears. And then the family, the living family members, would go up, stand next to the perpetrator. Would you ever see that happening here in the States?
I can't.
Stand next to the perpetrator and talk about what it was like, what they did, killing their loved ones. And then they talk about how hard it was to live next door to each other. And they'd say things like, sometimes the police came, but we don't have that anymore. And I thought, oh my gosh, the power of forgiveness. And if you look at it from a spiritual component, why did that happen? What was supposed to occur there for the land, for the people, for the lessons, for the themes, to have something so heinous and so violent, and have these people come together in a very loving, forgiving manner? I mean, it just really, warmed my heart. And talk about being able to be a part of that. And then, while we're on the trip, we were taken to this orphanage. I didn't even know that we were going. And we went to this orphanage, and this American woman who's tough as nails, she thinks she's in her 80s now, ran this orphanage and school. So we were taken around the orphanage at the school. I walked in, and all the way to the back, I saw this little boy. He had a distended stomach. He had, stuff coming out of his nose, and he was 6 months old. And something just came over to me, and I'm like, I'm supposed to adopt him. And I walked back, and I said, can I please hold him? So I held him, and he was just so beautiful in every way. So I asked questions about, can we adopt here? And she's like, no adoption, no adoption. And I kept in touch with this woman. So my husband and I, sent money over to help him with schooling. And there was a time that my husband was very sick for about 3.5 to 4 years. And I know that we'll get into that with caregiving and things like that. And we had been in touch, nonstop with this orphanage and with Arlene, who ran the orphanage. And at one point, she contacted me and said, you know what, I think we can open the doors to a private adoption. Let's do this and not go through the country. And this was right in the middle of my husband's illness, and I'm like, yes, let's do this. Somehow we'll just make this happen. So we went through the paperwork, we did whatever is necessary, and there were other times that my husband and I tried to adopt as well, and things fell through. And so we were both really excited, and I think it was in August, either late August, early September, she contacted us, and it was absolutely heartbreaking because she said, we want you to have Johnny. Johnny has no family here, but the government said no. And this was a child who had absolutely no family whatsoever. So, it took me a long time to get over, not being able to have him be adopted by us. And I think he's about 7 or 8 now. So, I think about him all the time. So that was something that I didn't plan on being involved in, but your knowing is your knowing. So that was another part of Rwanda as well, too. And I just want to say one more thing that's pretty poignant when it comes to forgiveness. Everybody has things happen to them in their life. Everybody. So many of my patients and clients will say, well, what happened to me is not as bad as someone else. And I'll say, you know what, don't minimize it, because this is part of...
It's not a competition.
Yeah, and this is part of your path. This is part of your journey. And I remember this one gentleman who I spoke with in Rwanda, and he said, Paige, my whole family was slaughtered. So I got a machete, and I stalked the people who had slaughtered my family, and I knew when they came, when they left, and I sat behind a bush, and I was getting ready to kill. And he said, I looked up, and there was this feeling that came over me, through me, and I said, that's the divine. That's the spirit that we're all part of. And he said, great forgiveness just came over me, and I put my machete down, and I said, what is this going to prove? So I said to him, you know what? Your story, what you chose to do and what you decided to take in is going to teach others that no matter what happens to us, you can have all the emotions that go with it, but eventually, one way or another, you knew the people who did this, whether they were strangers, but there's a knowing because we're all connected. So in that moment, behind that bush, with that machete in his hand, something, the divine, the spirit came in him. And I hear it all the time. I felt it many, many times in myself. And it's that power of, wow, it's the knowing of forgiveness. So it was just so powerful, and I'll never forget him. And I tell that story a lot to people who are struggling with forgiveness, because we all struggle with it at some point or another.
Well, that's what I was just thinking, is do you think that people like you who have the ability now to communicate and get these stories out, that's why you had to go through these extreme experiences, that they are poignant to other people. It's like but again, it's not a competition. We all have our own things.
Absolutely.
But how could I not forgive anybody for something if somebody can forget, the people in Rwanda are...
They're amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. That doesn't mean that they don't take steps back. And that doesn't mean if you're on the road to forgiveness for something that was just heinous or brutal or just so difficult, you can take 3 steps forward and maybe a step back. But maybe the step back that you take isn't for as long, and the intensity is not as long. So, I think we need to strive for that, because look what's going on in our world right now. It is a very different place since 9/11, you know, and I was at 9/11
Well, that's
as well too. So there's many
I was
stories
going to bring that up. I didn't.
at
Again,
some
it's
point
not
we'll talk
funny. We're
about
not
that
laughing.
too.
It's just
Yeah.
amazing where all you
Yeah.
have been. It's. Yes, please tell us about your.
Do we have time in this segment, or?
I think we do. If not, we'll
Okay.
take it over to the next one.
All right, so you know, that was the first time that we had really been attacked on our own land. So nobody really knew what we were doing. So I kind of knew that I needed to be up there with the skills that I have. And I was in my office down in Delaware at the time. I was living in Philly. And I walked out of the office. This was the day of 9/11. And I walked out, and I was by myself. And I stood there, so I was standing up, and I felt this pushing, this banging of both back of my feet that like pushed my body forward. And there was nobody around me. So I'm like, okay, what are you trying to tell me? And I kept getting the hit. And so many messages were, this is your time, we've been preparing you for this, you need to be up there. And it kept hitting my heels until I said, all right, I'm going in, and somehow I'm gonna make this happen. And through so many different ways, it was just natural how I made a phone call, then I was contacted because somebody knew about my background, went up to New York. So I spent September, October, November going back and forth on the train from Philly to New York. So I was working my one job, and I was still going to New York, you know, a week at a time. So I guess there's so many stories about New York. The land was very violent but angelic all at the same time. And I don't know if we'll have time to get into it now, but when we talk about more of a death, I'd like to share the story about how death visited me when I was there, and visited me to the point that I would understand death more and more and more, so I could do the work that I did up there in New York and going forward. And I think it was a month before 9/11 happened. I always get knowings of what's coming next. And I was standing outside a parking lot. I can't remember what parking lot. And I remember saying out loud, I need to know more about death now. I need to know even more now, even more. And that's been part of my journey. And when I was up there, the second day there, death visited me in my hotel room and kept coming back for 3 nights. I think I'd said earlier that I've never really shied away from things about death.
Yeah.
Whether it was because I've spent a lot of time training with first responders, paramedics, firefighters, law enforcement. I've seen some gruesome things myself. So in New York, you know, that was the first time that that's ever happened. So death was all around. And at that time, but the first or second week when we were there, people were still looking at this as recovery, like trying to find somebody who was living, someone who had, you know, lived through that. So I'd gone back to my hotel room, which became my family because I was there for 3 months, you know, on and off. And I had gone to bed, and I was laying in like the fetal position like this. And I remember feeling this body, this entity, come into the room, so if this was my bed, they would come right up to the bed, and I felt a satchel, a brown, deep brown satchel that hit the bed right here. And I remember I was terrified, I was petrified, and I didn't want to move, and I just laid in that one spot, and I thought, I'm not going to look at his eyes, I'm just going to lay here. I mean, beads of sweat were pouring down me, and I didn't move that whole night.
That sounds like the classic Grim Reaper.
I know, and I laid there in that position the entire night while this body, it was a tall, thin body with this brown, like, the Indiana Jones, the brown satchels, it was like that brown satchel. So I didn't really sleep that well. And then when I had to get up in the morning, physically he wasn't there, but the thickness and the depth and the breadth of death, I could feel all through me. And I thought to myself, how am I going to be able to go out there and help these people working those many hours, because this is sticking to me like glue. And I remember walking to the bathroom, and it was just heavy, and it was dark, and it was almost like I could feel him through me and in me, and I was just very nervous. So he followed me inside of me everywhere that entire day. Everywhere that I went, I had this uncomfortable, heavy feeling of death. And it wasn't from anything that I heard, you know, days prior. This was something very different. So I came back to my room that night and I thought, oh my gosh, is he going to come back again? So once again, I laid down in bed, and sure enough, he showed up again. I was awake all night, felt that satchel. This time I moved my eyes a little bit higher up, but I didn't want to look in his eyes. And I just kept feeling the intensity of death. So this went on that next day as well, came back for the third day, laying in bed, and I thought, I've got to do something different. So I laid in bed, he came back again, satchel right here. So I looked up, and the message I heard was, you asked me to know more about the feelings of death. I am here. So I looked up and I looked into what I could call eyes. It's hard to explain, but I've had many of these experiences before, and I've had so many clients through the years, had similar experiences. And as I looked into his eyes, it's almost like I could feel what the body felt like when it was dying. I got to see different types of images of what happened at 9/11 when people jumped, this and that, and how the soul was pulled out. So they didn't feel what was going on. And it was almost like water was going through me, and I could, or like wind going through me, where I could feel everything that this death had visited me represented about death. I can't even put language to it.
So it's like a guide?
It might have been, one of my guides,
Wow.
but it was one of my death guides, and
Wow.
I've been visited many times now in different ways. So I was awake with him most of the night, just taking this all in, feeling what this was about. And you would think I'd be exhausted because I didn't sleep the past couple of nights. So as I started to take him in, instead of fighting what death was all about, I just allowed. And I started to embrace what it was.
Well, I was
And
going to say, how did that change you?
Well, there were so many emotions for me that went along with it, but because I was in 9/11 and I was there to help, for me it was exhilarating because I thought, okay, I get it. This is how I can bring more hope. But now how am I going to explain what I know
Right.
to people that I'm helping? And you just find verbiage and language, to help people. So this time when he followed me to the bathroom, it was almost like we merged together. And there wasn't fear about that anymore. And there was hope. And there was a sense of, okay, I'm ready to go out. I know how to do this in a very different way than when I first came up here for 9/11. So he has always been with me. Like when I'm talking right now, it's almost like he's right next to me. And that was part of it. I had asked, I need to know more. And I continue to ask more and more about that, and I continue to get more answers, more sensations, more feelings. I've many people who've transitioned, and I use transition instead of the word died, because like we said earlier, the body's gone,
Yeah.
but who we are, spirit and soul, whatever you want to call it, lives on. And in working with thousands of people through the years, I've heard story after story after story of being visited by the person who's died close to them. I've had messages from people I don't even know. I could be on a plane sitting next to someone I don't know, and then I'll get a message from someone's aunt, and I'm like, how am I going to turn to the person next to me? And I've done it saying, excuse me, you don't know me, but do you have? So for me, I've been very fortunate being in the field of trauma because I'm getting more and more layers, seeing things, feeling things, getting messages of how I can better help us, all of us in this human form who are dealing with sickness. We don't know if someone's going to live.
Yeah.
A long-term disease. And when we are midlife right now, so many things happen and people around us start to get sick and they start
Exactly.
to die, or we hear real tragic stories like, why did that happen, Paige? Or how come this 10-year-old child didn't get to live their life?
Yeah.
So with my experiences that I've had, I've been able to at least give them something that they can have that can better help them with what's going on.
Well, and as we talk about that in our second act, as we move into this time of our life, the whole idea of mortality becomes more and more
present
present
and prevalent.
Yeah, exactly. And how do we deal with death or view death or help, a dying spouse or a friend or how do you? I mean, obviously you help people through that transition. Is there any words of wisdom or something that we can let us in on how you counsel? How have you made people feel better in that situation?
Well, again, I think I've been fortunate, and I write a lot about this. I have a new book that hopefully will be out this spring or summer, and I give examples of this. But the one client that comes up to me, she was 27, 28. Her name is Allison, and she had triple negative breast cancer. And this is an example of how I help the families. For her, when I first started working with her, we talked a little about life, but we talked a lot more about death. And what I have found is when somebody, if you have a situation when someone is terminal or close to death, whatever it might be, however it might play out, you have to allow the person to have those conversations. But what I find is those of us around that person don't want to have those conversations because we're always going, you can do it, you can stay here, act like, you know, that everything's normal. But what I have found is sometimes you rob the patient of not being able to have those conversations and want to kick them around as far as, well, this is my fear. What do you think is going on? Do you think I'm going to die? Like, it really takes a lot to have those conversations. We can talk about a lot of different things in this world, but when it comes to death, people are so afraid to talk about it. It's almost like, well, if I talk about it, then it's going to happen to me. Well, it is going to happen to you. It might not happen to you tomorrow. But when you give someone the opportunity and the space to talk about, what are you feeling about it? What are you thinking about it? And then with her case, you know, I helped the family embrace what this, you know, is about. And also, I was lucky too, because sometimes, especially with hers, she had had a childhood friend in high school who had died in a car accident. Now, I didn't know a lot of this, but he showed up to kind of let me know, to tell the parents, okay, he's here. He's going to be here to help your daughter do this. This is what you guys can begin to say to help her. Here's the verbiage. Here's how you can possibly be able to help her and her soul transition out. Because what I've seen too, sometimes in hospitals, when I'm helping someone transition, there's souls outside of a hospital room watching that, of course, the human form of them have died, but their soul's still here because maybe they didn't get a chance to do the full transition. So with this remarkable family who I'm so close with, and I think of family myself with them, they did everything they needed to do so she could transition. Was it inexplicably
So we could
painfully
actually
hard?
hold somebody back from doing a full transition?
Well, there's so many different ways. There's not
Okay,
just one thing.
okay.
I've seen souls that have gotten stuck, whether it was in a car accident. I've had little kids come to me who've been in a car accident. They show up not knowing what happened because it happened so quickly. I mean, I've seen so many different things. And then when they come to me in their soul form of they're still here, I kind of help them, okay, this is what happened, this is where you are, this is where you can go, and I help them go there. But when someone's dying, you have an opportunity as a family, or whoever's going to be there with them, or even nurses, doctors, whatever, of kind of giving them that space to talking and kind of saying, it's okay, if you're ready to go on your next path, on your next journey. I'm just fortunate because I can feel who comes into the room that's not of human form. So I can, you know, help them do that. That doesn't mean it's not going to be painful and hard, and on a human level, we miss them terribly, and there's so much pain, and there's anger, feel it all. But to be able to give a family or a person just a little bit of insight that I've gleaned, and I don't know 100%, I don't think any of us knows 100%, but there's some of us like there who are like me, who have insights, pieces, knowing that we can at least give to you. You know, while you're going through this.
Wow.
And us being mid-age, you know, thinking, where do I go from here? Well, you're going to go somewhere. And there's other realms and there's journeys. So you may leave your physical form, but my gosh, there's so much
we really
more.
do, there are old souls that we reconnect with in different forms, and we have, and somehow we know, or we really don't lose the people around us. Would that be fair?
Well, you know what? I think there's a piece of that. I also think that sometimes the family of origin that you come into is not your real soul family. It's a family that you come into to get here and then learn the lessons, help with whatever needed. But it might be other people that you meet along your travel that are like, yeah, that's my soul family. And that's a whole other segment on soul families and how they visited me before. And but there's not one way, and I want to make that clear.
Yeah.
I've seen so many different ways. So it's really, It's as individual as your body is. It's as individual as your experiences are.
Well, and we're coming to the end of another
Okay.
segment. Is there anything you want to add in terms of the closing out the death segment, if you will, of somebody who might be facing this right now? What is something they can implement right away that might help the whole situation, help them?
Facing
and
it
their
as a
loved one?
patient or facing it as a caregiver? Or
As a
both?
caregiver, I think.
Just know that this is not it. That I know it's scary to think this is all that you know in human form because it's tangible. We can feel this here. But when you do decide, or when it's time for you to transition, the sense and the feelings that come over you and what you're able to do and how you're able to expand is amazing. And you will be able to come back in contact who you need to. And those who are losing someone, and when I say losing someone in this particular moment, you never lose them. They're not lost. They're just not here in physical form. You're going to have a tough time, but know that there are signs, that there are messages, and sometimes you can feel and know. Everybody I've worked with is starting to pay attention to messages, to signs, and say, Paige, I noticed this. That's great. That's when you know there is more. So when you decide to transition, let's say that you're the caregiver, just know that maybe that person will come and meet you. Because we all have spirit guides, helpers, angels, whatever you want to call them, check the mark, animals. Who knows who comes to help us?
Be open to it.
Be open to it and know it's really going to be okay.
So how do we put all this to use?
So I think I talked, in the beginning about what is stress, what is traumatic stress. And just as a review, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? So what could affect you might not affect me as much as it affects you. It's not right or wrong, it's just what it is. So what we'll be talking about more is what I also shared a little bit about is this thing called your body holds a lot of the story. Of course, the brain does too, but this holds a lot of the story. And when we come into this lifetime, we've got our guidebook. It's just no one guides us on how to open up and use the guidebook, and that's what I kind of help to do. So when you go through traumatic stress, so many physiological things happen in the body. So I'd like to talk, in our next series about what's adrenal fatigue. What are adrenals? Why is it important? And I can say that, there's this Eastern-Western kind of battle sometimes that goes on, that the Eastern medical world says, yes, we see all this, and the Western medical world goes, no, 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 no. And I'm all about, it is not this way, it is not this way, it is a combination together. So, what is adrenal fatigue? What are the symptoms of it? Who has it? How do you get it? Why is it so important, especially in our midlife too, when the body starts breaking down? So we'll talk about that. Talk a little bit about, what is the body's role in our life? And what about the brain? Well, I'm here to tell you that you have two brains. You have your brain up here, and then you have your brain in your gut. It's the second brain. And it's amazing how the second brain is vital and it's important, and how so many times there's misdiagnosis because often we look at what goes on up here, depression, anxiety, mental illness, as being it's just up here, when you've got to look at what's going on physiologically in the gut. There's a brain-gut connection, so we're going to talk about that too.
To paraphrase the Western medicine, Eastern medicine, that we might be surprised what's really ailing us.
Definitely, and I know I'm not a medical doctor. Let's make that
Right.
perfectly clear. I'm not a medical doctor. But with everything that's gone on with me in my life, with my own medical issues growing up in trauma, and having been a caregiver to my husband who was on death's doorstep 3 times, I also work and train with integrative doctors, so I've learned a lot with that as well too. And I can tell you that when clients or patients come to see me, I'm not focusing just on what you're telling me. What is this telling me? Asking various questions about that, especially the gut, the thyroid, the adrenals. And also, where have you traveled? If you've traveled international, what's gone on international with the food, with the parasites, with, for instance, when I was in Iraq, I came back and could barely lift my left arm. I had numbing in both my hands, both my legs. Got checked out. One person said, "Oh, it's a syrinx in your brainstem." I'm like, "No, I don't have a tumor in my brainstem." Found out and learned, excuse me, that I had high levels of radiation in my body.
No.
So you never know where radiation lurks.
Yeah, please have some water.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. Also, mold. Why is mold so important? And why is it something that sometimes gets hidden, but often misdiagnosed as mental illness. When it's not mental illness, it's mold. And we've got mold everywhere. So there's all these different facets and pieces from my experiences personally that I've gone through, working with my patients and clients, working with integrative doctors, and being the #1 advocate, medical researcher, and caregiver for my husband as well. So lots of things that I just want to bring up to our viewers. So maybe this kind of information, they can have another set of eyes on things. Because you don't want to discount either one of these, West or Eastern. They're both equally just as important. But you have to bring them both together to really look at it. And middle age, when things start falling apart, is it really what it looks like? Or is it really something else underneath it? And chicken or egg, is it the medical condition that started first, or is it the emotional condition that started first? Every time you have a medical condition, you'll have an emotional condition that comes with it. And that's a lot of times I've taught medical students why this is so important. And that's an area that I want to spend a lot more on too, to actually teach our doctors.
Well, and you teach people how to get into their bodies and understand.
Right.
So for people who aren't around you or don't have the luxury, as I do right now, to have you right here, and maybe as we're going to be doing, doing some hands-on stuff, can you teach this remotely?
Yeah. I have clients all over the world, so I can Skype with them or just by phone. I can do it face-to-face, virtually, it doesn't matter. It's just a lot of times people like to have my hands on them because, touch is powerful.
Yeah,
But
sure.
if you can't be with me, it's very easy to do it long distance as well. Yeah. It's this. We already know everything we need to know. We knew before coming into this lifetime. We just forgot it all in human form. So I'm here to remind and say, let me wake you up again. You have your knowing in there. But along with being human, boy, this body's taken a hit with the food that you take in, the smells that you take in, the environment, the stress, the trauma, the relationships. I mean, if you think about it, as a human form, we take a lot in. And how many people begin to ignore it or numb it or avoid it? And I'm here to tell you, if I gave you a trash bag and had you list all the things that have gone on in your life and said, go over there and pick all these pieces out of your trash, put it in there, and I tied it to your wrist, which I've done in trainings many times, the first thing you would do is...
You've actually taken trash.
Yes, I've actually taken trash, physical trash.
Okay.
If I tied your trash bag to your wrist and had you walk around all day with it, go to the bathroom with it, eat with it, what do you think you would do?
I'd try to get rid of it.
Exactly, you'd pay attention to it.
Yes.
But with trauma, with stress, with difficult things that happen, if it doesn't smell bad enough and it doesn't stink up a room, what do? We open up our dresser drawer, we put it in there, and then we close it. Until we keep putting more things in that dresser drawer and the drawers break.
Why do we do that?
Think about
Is it stigma? Is it what, or did we just don't want to deal with the pain or go through it again? What?
Do you think anybody wants to really feel pain?
No, of course not.
Right. On
We
the
avoid
human
pain.
level, we avoid pain. But pain sends us incredible messages. So I teach, how do you embrace pain without it overcoming you? And it can be done. It can be done. Because most people are like, Paige, if I feel everything, I have a feeling that I'm just going to break apart.
Yes.
Say, no, you're not going to break apart. You're going to free yourself.
That would be hard to comprehend.
Because I do it in such a different way, and it's all about empowering you, so you don't, have to keep saying, well, how do I do this? How do I do this? Let me teach you. Let me show you. Let me have you feel it, and when you feel it, when you have a knowing.
What has been, maybe in closing out, one of the most rewarding experiences you've had that you can share with us?
Oh my gosh.
Does anything come to mind when I ask that question?
It's more general to me. I think one of the most rewarding things, and it gets me teary-eyed again, is giving people hope where they think there's none. Letting people know you are not alone, because that has been my tagline, that if there's not a physical person next to you, there's a guide, there's an angel, there's a helper, there's a light being. They're all next to you. And I teach people when they're going through this trauma and stress, how do you hear them? How do you feel them? And I'm able to actually get them in touch with them, because let's face it, ultimately we are alone with our thoughts and what goes on. But if you can feel and have that knowing that you aren't, it makes the biggest difference in your life while you're here, living an exhilarating adventure, but very challenging world.
Yeah. Paige, on that note, I think we're going to wrap this up.
Okay.
And we'll see you soon on another podcast, on our
Love
new
to.
podcast series on Second Act TV. Thank you so much for
You're
joining
welcome.
us. We will obviously be linking to Paige's information, so if you want to email her and continue this conversation personally, you may do so. We will also have all information about Paige on our website. You can find us on Facebook, and do remember to tune into our YouTube channel, Second Act TV. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.